Hello, hello. Can everybody hear me okay? Can everybody hear me okay? No. Yeah, okay. Wonder what the dude's doing. No? Closer? Jeez. Oh my. Am I gonna have to be like this for the whole talk? Yeah, I'll just talk super duper loud. Oh man. I got a voice for radio today, so it'll just be this big booming voice. Okay. Oh well, since I'm already in the groove, let's start. So, containerized databases for developers. Yeah, bit of a mouthful. But first, just a quick little something about me. So I'm the ops lead at PreviousNext. That kind of the running joke is if it's not a front end thing, if it's not a developer thing, then it must be an ops thing, and that's my role. I'm in charge of a lot of stuff in terms of our Kubernetes deployments for all our environments. I actually hack all day and go, and I have a passion for workflows. My kind of entry point into ops was around CI and improving that process. So that, and as well as this topic today, like feel free to ping me on Twitter. I love talking about this stuff or in the halls. So the first thing I want to clarify is that, lovely first slide, containerized databases for developers. That doesn't mean run MySQL in production inside a container. That's not what I'm talking about today. Don't do that. This is more about the local development flow that I'm so passionate about, that loop between taking a dev environment, getting it on your local, and running with it. So what I want to start off with is a bit of the current state of things, and yep, pun intended, state is hard. So containers are hard, okay? Sharing is hard. Sharing state is incredibly hard. And like every talk, let's put our hands in the air. So how many developers do we have in the crowd? Woo, heaps. How many people, yeah, keep them up. Okay, how many people run like a local stack? How many people have databases on their local stack? Okay, cool, yep, and I won't get everybody to bring their hands down now, but like think about those databases for a second, like usernames, passwords, sensitive information. Yeah, sweet, like sharing is hard, right? But don't take it from me, and you guys, like there's a couple of breaches, in the last couple of years that prove the point. This one's the Australian Red Cross. It was, this one is a bit of a doozy. It's very personal to a lot of people. 500,000 people's donor records were leaked online. Yeah, very, very sensitive stuff, very personal stuff. These people are coming in to, give blood and donate, and for me, that's like they're heroes. I'm scared of needles, so these guys are absolute heroes. But yeah, this was all exposed because people were trying to share, share state. So I won't go through the whole thing, but the red is where it's at. Like, due to human error, the unsecured data has been posted on the website. This was actually a database in the web root, so yeah, like that's that old chestnut, right? Somebody wants the database. I put it in the web root. We'll get rid of it in 5 minutes. No, never gets cleaned up. But it wasn't just like somebody's name and their address. It's actually pretty sensitive information. Some stuff that people wouldn't want getting out. Like, people come in to these kinds of organizations like under the pretenses that they're filling out the form, they're doing the right thing, they're being very open because they think their data is going to be handled well, it's going to be respected. Yeah, some very, very interesting and scary stuff. But, that's personal, that's like us, that's people, but what about corporations? What's the equivalent of that? Well, that'd be their credit card information, right? So this is another breach in the last year where it was a bank that exposed, it was like 50,000 credit card sort of transfers, and that's, that I don't think an organization would be too happy with that kind of stuff getting out. I don't really want my family knowing how many beers I bought last night looking at my credit card statements, so imagine an org. Like this one was, again, sharing. Sharing was the common factor here. It was, the database was inadvertently stored in a public available cloud service. S3. You know, S3 bucket. I'm just guessing here, but I'm gonna say S3 bucket public, made public, and for sharing. So sharing's hard. I've hammered that home. You're all convinced sharing state is hard. Accessing it is hard too. Like that's the other common thread here. Like putting these up into the doc routes, access is really tricky, especially when it comes to sharing with different things. Like in a lot of these examples, it would have been, you know, sharing to a developer, somebody who's trying to get it done on their local environment. But there's also in this new age of like CI/CD, and especially with, you know, the adoption of like Travis, Circle CI, Bitbucket pipelines, all these CI tools, we're giving these databases to these managed services and we don't know what they do with that data. You know, like maybe they keep a cache somewhere, you know, to speed things up. That we don't know what their policies are with a lot of this stuff or whether they keep to them. So that's really scary. And then if you look at a very traditional environment where it's maybe SSH like as the access to the environment, well, now you've just given a CI pipeline like shell access to your dev environment, maybe staging, maybe prod. But you've given them more than they actually need to facilitate the job, and generally unsanitized databases as well with all those credentials. Development. So here's another one. How many people in their local environments have, yeah, this is a fake ticket. So, but yeah, how many people, like I know everybody knows somebody who has had like a local development environment, they've had their mail server configured, and then it's like, whoops, I just spammed everybody, every user, you know, in that database, right? Like that's, you know, from my local. So it's like, yeah, users receiving from localhost, wasn't me. It was me. So I've kind of set the scene, right? You know, it's a pretty hard landscape. You know, we need databases, right? We need databases for our local. That's the workflow that we operate in. So it was time to put a bit of a modern spin on it. Like I took a step back and analyzed the problem and kind of went, okay, well, modern spin. So yeah, like everything, it's like, yeah, man, containers. Let's do containers. Yeah, like no buzzwords. Like I'm the worst for it. Like I love all the buzzwords, man. Like it's, yeah, I love all the technology, and you know, at first it's like containers, but yeah, really containers. So okay, but to outline kind of the goal here for us on our journey through this was to take this, which was a local development stack with a database, MariaDB, some credentials to bootstrap it, which then developers would be at their mercy to go and pull the database down and import it. We wanted something like this. Like we wanted just an image. And we wanted all that split off from, we didn't want the developers to be at the mercy of this. We wanted an automated repeatable pattern that just produces an artifact that then they can consume. So yeah, spoiler alert, it was implemented internally. This is a blog post from a little while ago, kind of going through the whole process. This is going to form some of this talk as well. This kind of, I looked at this and went, I can make a talk around that and add more to it. So if you want a little bit more information to go back to, this is where to go. But the implementation itself is all open source. So it's called MySQL Toolkit, or MTK for short. And it's kind of just a meta project for all the work that we do around MySQL at PreviousNext. But more importantly, like it's not just like we went and, you know, wrote a whole bunch of tools. Like we stood on the shoulders of giants. Like this is an amazing package that interfaces, it's written in Go, interfaces with MySQL and lets you sanitize the database as it's coming down, as it's being dumped, which is incredibly powerful. But don't take my word for it. You know, there's others. There's others that have done it. This was an incredibly validating blog post. It wasn't too long after mine that came out that I saw this had been released that day, and I read through it and just went, wow. Like, yeah, they were using MySQL databases to speed up their local development process because they had these really, really, really large databases. And it became the cornerstone for their workflow. So now I just want to go through some steps, some very basic steps that you could run on the command line to implement this kind of containerized database workflow. So, but first I got to introduce you to some personas. So we have Samantha the sysop and Dave the developer. Like all sysops, Sam is paranoid. They're like, oh my God, or you know, me. Yeah, it's like all these developers are pulling down databases and you know, who knows what's in there, like all web form data and passwords and, you know, like they're all about automation, and yeah, just like me, Samantha can't get enough of those containers. So, but then Dave, you know, maybe this isn't the room for it, but yeah, developer, lazy. Yeah, but wants a database, wants fast builds, and wants them now. Yeah. So just to kind of preview like the MySQL MTK tool. So this is a config file that we have that sanitizes the database. It's a bunch of rules that kind of go over as it's being dumped. So we do things like strip out all the cache, we strip out all the web form submission data. We also sanitize a bunch of fields. This is actually a much larger file. I've put this up here for brevity so you can see a few scenarios, but yeah, things I can show you some more later in a demo, but the key takeaway here is we've defined our configuration in like a standard spot. It's handled by operations. It's not on a per project basis. It's something like it's kind of a global rule set, and I think we're in a very unique position with the apps that we work with, where generally this stuff, like it's a defined pattern. Like we know that we have a users field data table. We know we have a cache table. We know that we're probably going to use the web form module at some stage. It doesn't hurt to have a big exhaustive list that covers everything. So I think we're in a very unique position to have a very common rule set that covers like 95% of the total blast area. Secondly, and the red is actually to signify the op. Like the red strip down the side is to signify the op. So the op has that config. The op has a Docker file where they just add the database in now that they've sanitized it with that config, and then they import it. And putting it all together, it's with this command. So you point it at a MySQL instance, username, password, database, the config, dump it, and then build. So these commands are all on that blog post. Yeah, I think these are pretty simple, nice and simple. But we also talked about access. So it's like, Nick, you're putting everything in a container and then you're going to push it up and into like a registry somewhere. And I just want to make, at first I was like, yeah, that doesn't feel right. But then as I looked into it, I kind of thought, well, like the Docker registry isn't like an S3 bucket per se. Like the Docker registry has a lot of rules and enforcement and ACLs, and you can have teams that can pull certain databases, and you can revoke those credentials, and it sits near the app, and it's all sanitized, so it actually really fits really well. But yeah, definitely lock down your images, otherwise you're back into stage one. But more importantly, private registries are everywhere. Like every major cloud provider has a Docker registry, which is huge. I think this is amazing, but I won't go off topic. So that's all the ops side, right? They're setting a config, they're dumping the database, they're packaging an image and pushing it to a registry and handing out some creds to the development team. And then finally, the developer comes in and goes, sweet, well, okay, I'll take that image, I'll pull it down, I'll add it into my Docker Compose flow, and then I'll update some settings.php creds for the database, and I'm off to the races. if I want a new copy of the database, if the op has automated it, thrown some cron on it, done a nightly database dump, package and push, well then as a developer, my new workflow now is just pull DB, which is huge. No more SSHing into servers and pulling backups from somewhere and importing a database. And if that database is huge and takes like 30 minutes to import, no more like grabbing 2 coffees. It's just one command and pulled down. So with all that, I just want to also cover sort of how we do it at PreviousNext, because we have a lot of projects. And this is all done via Kubernetes. We have all our sites are running on Kubernetes, dev, staging, prod. We have a very consistent way with how we share our database credentials, which puts us in a very good position to just automate this and pick up all those credentials as MySQL database connection details, and then package an image and then push it to the registry, sanitize and push to the registry. So for us, it was actually a really nice flow here and a really nice integration that we could just sort of roll out to everything. But here, not to throw Kubernetes terms at you, but we have a config map. Just think of that as like a key value store with the database creds. We have a cron job that kicks off and then runs the build. We actually, instead of running that database image build on our local, we palm it off to code build, AWS code build, which you get like 4 gig of RAM and a CPU or 2. So it's awesome, especially when you're doing a very bursty overnight workload to package up all these databases. And then push it to the hub, and then we can have our untrusted build pipelines pull down these sanitized databases, and developers pull them down as well. And we also have Acquia integration too, so we actually pull for our Acquia stuff, we have 1 or 2 clients that are on that. We pull the backup, extract the database, import it on cluster, then sanitize it, and then let the process keep going, which has been huge. But with all this, I just want to kind of point out some outcomes, like the things that we saw. So for local development, now, before we were SSHing into servers, there was lots of steps. Those steps were probably different per hosting platform, different projects, different configuration, and very slow to, dump, rsync down, import. But afterwards, now we have image caching. The images are sanitized in a standard way across all our projects, consistent. And then it's also gives you this like quick bootstrap of feature branches, because as you're changing from feature branch to feature branch, you probably don't want to carry over a bunch of database stuff that you've had from the previous branch. You want to kind of destroy the environment and recreate it and then get going again. And that makes it really, really quickly, because you're not dumping a database and re-importing it. That's already been done. That hit's already been taken. For build pipelines, we previously had a lot of steps to dump a database and then import it and kind of get everything set up. We have a client that actually has a lot of external web services stuff that gets imported into the site and increases the size of the database, and the build itself was taking about 15-20 minutes to kind of prep everything. But we can actually do all that in the image build and take that sort of 30-40 minute hit at like 1 a.m. at night, where it's not the critical path for the day. And then after this, it's actually fast because it's all been done at night. Simple because now we can just put that one database image in our build pipeline instead of like hitting an endpoint, pulling it down, importing it. We don't trust our build pipelines, so like no sensitive data goes there. And it's also debuggable because I can show you later, but we can tag the images not just with like dev latest, like in the example, we can also put like a timestamp on them, which then opens up a massive possibility for going like, oh, maybe the reasons why my tests are failing is like somebody changed something on dev the day before and now they're failing. I can roll back to a specific tag and point in time and use that database and see what's going on. And for operations, it was interesting because we had a lot of comms around people getting started on projects and having like a consistent common way for people to use their local and get bootstrapped and going. And then sort of a little bit more internally, we had a lot of conversation about how we should be doing like a drush SQL dump, like kind of setup, like without SSH, since we're using Kubernetes. There was a lot of like base 64 and gzips, and like, yeah, it was very, very scary and needed to be solved. But now we have standardized access for all our images for the deployments as well as the databases. Again, debuggable, because you can change the tag on your local and pull it down. And yeah, operations can sleep at night. So yeah, that's a good one. But putting this all together, like these database containers are actually the backbone of our workflow. Like they're kind of the dark horse. They're like, people don't really talk about them too much anymore. They just kind of work, and that's it. Like they're kind of, in some ways, it's sad, but they're kind of taken for granted. But it's, but they're always there, and they just work. So, which is awesome. But more importantly, I just want to point out, it's not the tools, it's the workflow. So, going back to kind of the themes here, it's, you know, defining a consistent strategy for sanitizing your databases, automating it at night, and then also restricting access so then developers don't have to SSH into environments. A lot of this, you can use other tools to implement that. We just chose these ones because they were kind of the best that suited us. I also want to point out that like not all of us have the luxury of a site install workflow. So if you're building like a distribution or a product, then that's kind of the route that or the world that you'll live in. But I'm sure at some stage you would need to pull down a database to test somebody's environment. But site install workflow should get an honorable mention, because it means you don't need to pull down a database, you just reinstall the site and get going. And at the same time, it's not just this, right? It's not just dumping a database and sanitizing it and then packaging it up and pushing it. We're talking about people's data, but we're also talking about other sensitive stuff like keys, like credentials, API keys, like Google Analytics keys, stuff that all gets put into forms and stored in the database that may not be like developers doing it, you know, at a lower level. It's clients that are adding, their Google Analytics keys or something like that, but they're all in the database. And Nick Santa Maria has a great talk. It was yesterday. Sorry, you're going to need a time machine. But luckily we have YouTube. We actually have a viral video for 4.2K views for Santa's talk last year at Drupal South. And it talks you through decoupling your secrets from the application and then the encryption and all that. So, which is kind of the other side of the coin here. It's not just sanitizing, it's also handling other sensitive information correctly as well. Cool, yeah, so now I just want to do a little bit of a demo. It's not a big one. And, yep, Linux. So I've just got like a little Docker Compose stack, Apache, mounting my data in. I'm using AGOV. I've got a database image here with dev latest. I got Mailhog, don't really need it, but you know. And then this is the, up. And just like that slide, this is the same sort of sanitize. Like I've just implemented a quick little sanitization strategy for brevity again. But you can see I'm actually doing other stuff like sessions and semaphore and history and flood and like all, like there's stuff that, you know, like you probably don't want sessions like taken down to your local. And then semaphore is just kind of like utility stuff, like you don't really want them locks. History is a good one too. Batch, like you don't really want to pull a database down and have it run a whole bunch of stuff. You know, that's always fun and probably affects your CI/CD test suite. But then we also have like the sanitized mail, and you can see over here I've got my site, and we've got like this lovely little like sanitized mail across the address there, which is super fun. So we're actually planning to swap it out with just bogus email addresses, but for now it's just big and bold. And kind of just to prove that it works, which I'm sure you all trust me, but I'm just killing my local stack when everything wants to shut down. And then we'll just bring it up, and I'll even, you know, like we do. doc.ps. You can see images are still there. Whoops, like that's an ace up my sleeve, right? So let's down them, let's kill them all. There's nothing actually, running. And then if I do an up, everything's starting to run. And then it's kicked me out of the session because that's a fresh database that's just fired up, that was packaged up. It's kicked me out of my session, and then I'm good to start a new feature branch. So you could see like what I just did then could be integrated into a local development workflow where you're maybe changing branch, downing and upping the environment. And you could even like run the test suite on your local with like knowing that you don't have to stuff around with databases now. Cool. So we got time for questions. So, but yeah, thanks everybody. Sweet. We got one up the back.
Yeah. So you may have answered it inadvertently, but I was thinking about sanitization of the database and the opposite side, like you're flushing out sessions. How about injecting in sessions and other data to preload it for purposes of CI/CD?
Yeah, definitely. You could absolutely do that, and you could do that. There was an example of the Docker file, which would kind of be the best place to inject that. You could, right after that last run, you could have like a whole bunch of .SQL files that kind of have preloaded data, queries and things like that then you could inject that in. That's an absolutely great use case. Another thing that we've sort of seen in the wild was around like a QA team that needed to log into the site for test environments, and we're sanitizing the passwords. So what we did as a part of the like CI/CD process was something similar, not in the image. We had like 4 or 5 lines that were like setting sort of really long passwords for known QA users to kind of jump into temp environments and get going. So yeah, absolutely, you could put that there. You could put that image. You could, yeah, stuff around. Yeah.
Thank you. Sanitizing databases is really hard. Like there's a lot of data that spreads from a person's login through the system. I see you were dropping all of the web submissions data and so forth. That's good, but I'm interested to hear what else you've had to tackle in trying to or you might have tackled in trying to sanitize the sorts of data that creeps through a system in production.
Yeah. Damn, I don't have a big long example. But I would say like the web form stuff is kind of the big one, like that we went through. But then you've also got like all the random stuff like search API index stuff. Like I think one thing that maybe we don't think about is cache. We think about cache for performance, but cache is also, like cached pages and, like there's a lot of stuff that can bleed through there and just be, stored in page cache. So I think that's kind of also like a very, like one that we just don't think about that we do, and it's kind of, unspoken. We do it for performance, but was that one?
File names, like say if you have private files
Yeah.
uploaded.
Oh yeah, true. Yeah. That's my like, you're doing good, Nick. You got more time. Sorry. Cool. Right. So that's all.
How do you handle one-time requests? Like customer says, "Oh, my database is broke. Something's broken on production. I need the database done right now."
Yeah, so that's kind of a different workflow for us. So this is more about sharing it to local developers. Like we still have like a backup policy in place that dumps the database and stores it in a secure spot that then operations use. So for that, it's very much like 2 sort of separate workflows, I guess you could say. There's a lot that I could kind of branch off from here, but yeah, like we treat them as 2 separate workflows in that regard. One thing like that kind of sits in that vein is some clients have a requirement to kind of roll back the dial a little bit and go like, we want to reproduce an environment like, I don't know, like 3 months ago or something like that. And generally, if you've got like the deployed artifact image of the app and then you've got the database, you're pretty much there, and it's sanitized, but still in that kind of state where they can kind of see where their content and everything was at that stage. So that's kind of another thing that this fits in.
Do you have any means of filtering volume of data that you've got, say, to get a production database to a decent size so you can actually do development on it?
Yeah, yep, absolutely. So that is where like a lot of that cache table stuff is. We've also had like a lot of custom entities that have just, filled stuff up, and we've ripped those out. But
sort of a percentage, or say 10% left?
oh, right, yeah. So we haven't really done too much of that, to be honest. But like one thing that we are kind of tackling and trying to solve is like revisions. Revisions is a big one, and I think something like this like doesn't really lend too well to that, because revisions then so take field body for example, like that's a very commonly used field, and we've seen a lot of common cases of like that table becoming like 400 or 500 meg as people add more and more revisions. But the problem is you can't just cull it because there's kind of implications for all the other revisions and the rest of the data. So I think there's still kind of a process that you've got to do on at least dev, maybe, like as you're syncing the database to dev, and then like ripping out all your revisions as a way to kind of then let the automated database process kind of take the rest from there.
Is Drush sanitized? If you've got a Drupal, working Drupal,
Mhm.
you can use that as a
Yeah,
Drupal conscious tool.
Yep.
Like it knows about entities and
Yep.
relations.
yeah, absolutely. I guess the elephant in the room here is like, if I want to keep going, is why didn't you use Drush? Some people might be thinking that. And for us, the Drush side of things was more to do with like you needed like a bootstrapped site, and for us that's a lot of work to automate when we can kind of declare this rule set and just connect to the MySQL database. It makes it a bit more flexible as a tool if we want to go down other routes. So it kind of just decouples that from the situation. So yeah.
I have more of a comment. So what I like about the semantic sysops is kind of tools that you demoed is that like there's the dump,
Mm-hmm.
which does the sanitize, and then separately there's the DB build.
Mm-hmm.
So even if you're not in like an environment or organization where you can use containers, maybe you have to use SQL dumps and import them to a vagrant box or something.
Yep.
You can use MTK dump
Yep.
to get a sanitized and slim down database.
Yeah.
And that'll save you a bunch of space, a bunch of import time.
Yeah. Like if you were in a position where even on your local, you're like, I just want to take a snapshot of this point in time, and have it so I can just keep rerunning my tests over and over and over again. I don't want to keep dumping and importing my database and working with it and finessing it to get it back to a stage to run my tests again or something. Like if you just want to keep repeating, then you could just use those 2 command line tools and have kind of a cached artifact for local development. Yep.
What do you find performance-wise or speed-wise for CI? Has it greatly increased the speed? Because we do
Yeah.
site install workflow for
Yeah.
CI/CD.
Yep.
If you just pull an image,
Yes, and then a lot of those CI/CD providers also have caching for your images as well, which makes it so much quicker. We spend a lot of, like in the modern, not to dig on Drupal 8, but like in the modern age, in the modern flows, like half of the build would be stuff like, building the front end stack, composer install, like there's all these steps, and then the next thing you're doing is like dumping the database and importing it. There's a lot of time there. We've seen huge improvements, especially for the fact that, you've got this kind of artifact that you just boot up and get going instead of having to wait for something to dump and rsync down and then import. That's been huge. And it can't... No. It's... Well, one build was like that process was like 20-25 minutes. Like just to do the dump and the import, there was that much information. It was like I think it was a 1 gigabyte database or something to that extent. And then it was also like kind of stripping out all the data at the same time to kind of prep it. So it was 20-25 minutes, and that just went away. That actually just disappeared because it boots and gets going. To kind of tack onto that, it also opens the door for running stuff in parallel, because now you're not, incurring the cost of like the dump and the import, and having to do that down multiple streams, you know, like you can just chop that off and everything just boots up and kind of runs from there. So yeah, it really opens the door for parallel builds as well, multiple environments on pipelines. Yeah.
You look at other systems that MySQL don't, like extra to be backed up, which would allow like even faster dumps.
Yeah. I did a bit of looking around I guess I came in more from the sanitization story of things, and that was my entry point, and that's sort of where I found that tool. Didn't really see too much. Yeah, so there's definitely other tools that could complement this for sure, absolutely. But yeah, for us it was kind of just coming in from this like sanitization first kind of standpoint, and there wasn't really too much out there, so. Cool. Okay.
Great, thank you.
Sweet. Thanks.